A Ukrainian Stryker is pursuing a group of lone, fleeing Russian soldiers on foot across an open, frozen field in Russia's Kursk region. Straightforward, it races toward one of the soldiers with the intent of running him over. However, the soldier manages to evade the armored personnel carrier at the very last second. In response, one of the Stryker's crew members opens fire on the Russian with small arms while the vehicle takes a turn. The shots, however, miss, and the Russian quickly gets back on his feet, realizing the Stryker has made another turn to attempt the maneuver again. Miraculously, the Russian soldier manages to evade the vehicle once again. As he tries to continue his escape, the Stryker turns around and resumes its attack. This time, the gunner has a clear line of fire and hits the Russian, who goes down. For YouTube, I had to blur this part of the video, but the full unblurred footage is, as always, available on Telegram. The link is in the description. The Ukrainian drone that filmed all this also recorded several other semi-successful attempts by the Stryker to run over fleeing Russian soldiers in the vicinity. In response to the question of why the Stryker attempted this bold move of simply driving over the fleeing Russians, and why small arms fire was used instead of heavier weaponry, Ukrainian sources stated that the Stryker had run out of ammunition for its heavy machine gun during the course of its operations. However, the crew did not want to waste the opportunity to deal a heavy blow to the panicking, fleeing Russian soldiers. The soldiers had to cross wide open terrain without cover or concealment, making it easy for the Stryker to spot and track down the dispersed Russians. After several failed attempts and successful evasive maneuvers, this Russian also ended up under the wheels. It seems the Stryker crew took their time and calmly attempted to run over the Russians one by one, leading many commenters on the footage to argue that the Stryker's repeated attempts were not just tactical but psychological, aimed at breaking the morale of both the Russian soldiers involved and those who would later see this footage. While this approach can definitely be considered unorthodox combat tactics, it's not as uncommon in modern warfare settings as people might think, especially in asymmetric combat scenarios or situations where one side holds total dominance. Such tactics have actually been used quite often. There are many examples from the war in Syria where Syrian rebels chased down and ran over government troops and other militant groups after breaking their defenses and forcing them to flee across open terrain. In general, it is said that opportunities multiply when you seize them, and I believe that was the case here. A Ukrainian drone documented what, by today's standards, can be considered a massive human wave assault by North Korean soldiers advancing on foot through a snowy field in Kursk. It appears to be an element of up to company strength recklessly advancing but encountering Ukrainian artillery fire. The presence of North Korean soldiers is frequently questioned by Russian sympathizers. However, this type of combat by North Korean troops is historically documented, and North Korean soldiers have already been captured and interrogated. Video footage of this is also included in this video, but would be shown later. This Ukrainian Max Pro MRAP was directly hit by an incoming Russian FPV drone but managed to withstand the impact, even though the windshield was severely damaged. Due to the short duration of the clip and the lack of additional perspectives, the extent of the damage the vehicle sustained from the drone remains unclear. A lone Russian turtle tank is on the move somewhere on the front. It is being chased by a Ukrainian FPV drone preparing to crash into the tank. It hits the tank, which, however, keeps driving. Quickly, a second FPV drone dives and hits the now damaged tank again. After this, a third FPV drone finally disables the tank for good, leaving it immobilized. Now it's time for some target practice on the stationary vehicle. One more FPV targets the tank. Finally, a Ukrainian drone drops what appears to be termite onto the tank, completely finishing it off. A Russian soldier hiding in a large pipe in the Konal district of Chasiv Yar made the mistake of firing at Ukrainian positions through a crack in the pipe while a Ukrainian drone was filming the entire scene. After the drone kept observing the pipe a bit and noticed more movement, artillery fire was quickly directed at the pipe, targeting the Russians hiding inside. This Russian 2S-23 Nona SVK self-propelled artillery system was targeted by a Ukrainian FPV drone in the Donetsk region. One crew member noticed the incoming attack and quickly jumped off the vehicle to avoid being hit. After the hit, the vehicle came to a standstill, leaving just enough time for the remaining crew members to leave the area before the ammunition detonated. Speaking of ammunition, this Russian UAZ 452 Bakanka, transporting ammunition, took a direct hit from a Ukrainian FPV quad in the Liman region. As a result, the ammunition detonated in a massive blast. The destruction of this Russian Grad system by a Ukrainian FPV drone also resulted in a massive explosion, triggered by the detonation of the Grad's rockets. The stored munitions, designed for significant impact over a wide area, created a powerful blast upon ignition. Footage from Horlivka shows a Ukrainian FPV drone chasing down a Russian vehicle with soldiers inside. What's particularly interesting is that it was filmed from the ground by an eyewitness, providing a clear view of what it looks like to be chased by one of these small kamikaze UAVs. Although a direct hit on the vehicle was not recorded, an explosion could be heard at the end, and footage of a burning wreck, claimed to be the vehicle, was released afterward. The Ukrainian soldiers driving on a muddy road, as seen here, narrowly avoided an explosion that likely damaged their vehicle. It's unclear what caused the explosion, but the Ukrainians managed to avoid the worst of it and continued driving. That shotguns are increasingly being used for defense against drones by both sides is already well known, as shown in this video of a Ukrainian soldier shooting down a Russian drone from the cover of his trench. But this recent new development shown in the next few clips will now blow your mind, because apparently shotgun drones are now a thing in Ukraine. You heard that right. Ukraine has recently started using drones armed with shotguns to shoot down Russian drones, as shown in several clips that have surfaced across Telegram. From the looks of it, this method seems quite effective since you don't have to crash the drone into its target, which always carries the risk of losing your own drone as well. Of course, simply attaching a stick to a drone to down enemy drones, as seen in this example of a Russian drone downing a Ukrainian one, is always an option. However, using a shotgun is simply the safer solution. What do you think? In at least one instance, these shotgun drones were also used to target a lone Russian soldier. However, from the footage and the soldier's behavior, it appears the shots missed. It even seems the Russian managed to dodge an explosive, though it's unclear if it was dropped by a drone or the same drone. Since we're already talking about further weaponizing unmanned systems, we can't avoid discussing this event where a Ukrainian unmanned sea vessel allegedly shot down a Russian helicopter with an anti-air missile launcher. If true, this adds a new dimension to Ukraine's current naval warfare and addresses a major problem Ukrainian kamikaze USVs frequently face when targeting Russian warships, Russian helicopters. These helicopters could previously be easily and safely dispatched to intercept the vessels at sea without any significant risk. This now seems to have changed. By being able to operate small anti-air missile systems remotely, Ukraine might be able to lower the interception rate of their kamikaze boats, but we will have to wait and see. This cell phone video, recorded by an eyewitness, captured the moment the Ukrainian drone was intercepted in Duel, Russia, around January 13th or 14th, 2025. While we're on the topic of drone interceptions, this cat managed to swat down an FPV drone with its paw. It's unclear where exactly this was filmed, but fortunately the cat wasn't harmed and the drone didn't appear to be carrying an explosive payload. Here we have yet another piece of footage showing a close-range tank-on-tank engagement between Ukrainian and Russian forces. The tank battle involved 2 Ukrainian tanks and an armored column led by at least 1 Russian tank, followed by other armored vehicles during a Russian breakthrough attempt east of Myrnograd. According to Russian sources, the battle began when the Russian column entered Yelizavetovka after Russian troops captured the town of Vozdvizhenka. During the engagement, the Russian tank from the 5th Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces reportedly struck the first Ukrainian tank point-blank 3 times in the frontal armor. In return, the Ukrainian tank fired twice, but missed on both occasions. With the 4th shot, the Russian tank successfully penetrated the Ukrainian tank's armor, ultimately neutralizing it. The 2nd Ukrainian tank attempted to evade by taking cover behind the smoke from the burning tank and retreated from the battlefield. Following this, Russian infantry fighting vehicles advanced from the protection of the tank, deploying troops in Yelizavetovka, where they secured their positions, consolidating their hold in the area. A huge factor in the outcome of this engagement seems to have been that the Russian tank crew simply identified the Ukrainian tanks first. A general rule of thumb in tank-on-tank battles states that the side that spots the other first gains a major advantage and typically wins the battle. Of course, there are always exceptions to this rule, and it's also true that whoever penetrates the other's armor first almost certainly wins. But I think you know what I mean. Both sides appear to be firing high explosive shells here, possibly because neither side anticipated a tank versus tank confrontation. In fact, while we have seen plenty of tank versus tank combat during this war compared to previous wars on a larger scale, these engagements remain relatively rare. This is especially true for planned tank-on-tank battles. Most of the time, the close quarters battles we see occur because both sides stumble upon each other by coincidence. It seems that since tank-on-tank battles are so infrequent, high explosive shells are loaded by default, as they are sufficient for most targets other than tanks. Additionally, HE shells are more effective against personnel, trenches, and dugouts compared to armor-piercing rounds. Furthermore, since most tank-on-tank engagements tend to occur at very close distances, HE shells can also be effective in disabling optics or incapacitating tank crews. This is a rather interesting video showing a member of the Ukrainian Omega Special Forces unit, part of the Ukrainian National Guard, using modified 82mm mortar rounds against suspected Russian positions. The footage claims to show the rounds impacting right in the middle of several Russians, but due to the vegetation, it is hard to tell what or how many were among the trees. To launch the rounds, he is using either an RPG-7 or a PSR-L1. The latter is a modified American copy of the RPG-7 shoulder-fired rocket-propelled grenade launcher that is primarily manufactured for US allied nations who are accustomed to Soviet-style weapons. Here, a Ukrainian FPV drone ambushed a Russian desert cross buggy. The drone was lying in wait at the edge of a snowy road and took off just as the buggy drove past. It hit the buggy, causing it to stop and forcing the crew to flee. A second FPV drone was then dispatched to finish off the abandoned vehicle, which started to burn shortly afterward, as observed by a third FPV drone. Ukrainian sources recently released a video showing 2 captured and wounded North Korean soldiers during their interrogation. The video was published with subtitles and will be shown here shortly. The men appear to be heavily sedated. To comply with YouTube's guidelines, I have blurred their faces. As always, the unblurred version is available on Telegram, link in the description. Apparently, the 2 North Koreans were wounded in combat and were then captured and evacuated by Ukrainian special forces in the Kursk region. Drone footage of this was also shared and is now playing on screen. Interestingly, the Ukrainians were wearing full ghillie suits, which gives the impression that they ambushed the North Koreans. But let's take a look at the interrogation.
Чи знаєте ви, де ви зараз?
지금 여기가 어딘지 알아?
Не знає. Ви перебуваєте в Україні.
넌 지금 우크라이나에 있어, 우크라이나.
Ви знали, що ви воюєте проти України?
우크라이나 상대로 싸우는 거 알고 있었지. 몰랐어?
Не знав. А що вам казали ваші командири, коли відправляли на війну?
그러면 여기 지휘관들 모자는 뭐라고 그랬어? 누구랑 싸운다고 했어?
훈련을 실전처럼 해본다고 했어요.
Йому казали, що просто тренування.
북한의 가족들이 없어? 있어?
Родина є. Вони знають, де ви зараз?
부모님은 지금 너 어디 있는지 알아?
А як довго він на лінії фронту?
그러면 전선에는 1월 3일부터만 있었던 거야? 1월 3일부터 있었고 그러고 언제까지? 잡혔을 때까지?
1월 3일날 나와서 옆에 동료들이 죽는 것을 보고 거기 항공모에 숨어 있다가 5일날 부상당하고
3 числа був наступ. Бачив, що його солдати вмирають. Сховався у бліндажі. 5 числа його знайшли. Така історія. Ви хочете повернутися назад в Північну Корею?
북한으로 다시 돌아가고 싶어? 조선으로 다시 돌아가고 싶어?
Так. Ви хочете повернутися назад в Північну Корею?
다시 북한으로 돌아가고 싶어?
우크라이나사라고 맞춰온가.
우크라이나 괜찮은 것 같아? 여긴 좋아.
여기서 살고 싶어.
Я хочу жити в Україні. Ми розуміємо, що ви не володіли інформацією повною мірою, тому ми готові допомагати.
너는 지금 우리 여기 우크라이나 친구들이랑 나를 포함해서 아까 여기 선생님들 계셨잖아. 그분들이랑 잘 얘기를 하면 여기서 최대한 살 수 있도록 우리가 잘 해볼 테니까 건강하게 잘 있어야 돼. 건강하게 잘 있고 밥 주는 거 잘 먹고 알겠지? 자주 올 테니까.
집에는 안 보내주겠지요?
집에 가고 싶어?
가라면 가면
가라면 갈 거고 우크라이나 남으라고 하면 남을 거고.
Він сказав, що в принципі як йому скажуть. Тобто, якщо йому потрібно буде повертатися, то він повертатиметься. Якщо йому дадуть шанс залишитися тут, то він залишиться.
This Ukrainian FPV drone targeted a Russian soldier who appeared to be frozen in place, standing still despite at least 2 Ukrainian drones flying above him. Indifferent, almost catatonic, the soldier waited calmly for the drone's arrival.